Hey guys, CBHolo1 here. Welcome back to another video, and today, welcome to part 2 of the ballasting tutorial, where today we are going to be doing switches. So if you guys have not seen part 1 of this series, I highly recommend going to see that. Basically in that video I just did straights and curves because I didn't know how to do switches at the time. In this video, we're going to be obviously focusing on switches, but I'm not going to be going into as much detail in the process because I already covered that in the first part. There are two new materials that we're going to be using today to do the switches. One of them is masking tape, which you can use any kind of masking tape you want. I'm using this stuff. Basically, this is to cover up the frogs and the movement mechanism so that we don't get any gravel in there and prevent the things from doing their job. The other thing you're going to need is you're going to need something to press the tape into some finer edges. I'm going to be using the edge of these needle nose pliers, but if you have something that you think will work better, go ahead and use that. So I don't know what kind of switches you guys have on your layout, but I have two basic forms. I have this, which is just a standard turnout, which goes into a siding that currently isn't there. And then I have a crossover, which is what you guys saw in the first shot. So I'm going to be ballasting this switch in this video. And if you guys are going to do a crossover, it's the same process for each switch. And any differences that are in the crossover versus the turnout, I'm going to show you guys at the end after I ballast this, because I have another turnout, or another crossover, rather, that I need to ballast. Alright, so first things first is we need to mask any place that's going to have gravel being poured on top of it, but we do not want it to get into a mechanism. So basically, the movement mechanism up here is going to be the first part, so that, you know, we can still move it when all this is said and done. And then we're going to mask these frogs here, and then the center section, and then this frog. And I'm going to be putting masking tape over the movement mechanism, just for kicks. I'm also going to have it set to the straight position, because there's a little nub out here that we need to make sure we don't cover, because if you cover this, it's going to prevent it from moving all the way over, so we don't want that. So that's also going to get some masking tape over it. So let's go and do that. Alright, so first I'm going to cover up the movement thing. So this masking tape covers basically 2 ties and 2 gaps. So I'm going to have it so that it's going through the tie that's on this edge, and then the gap that's inside the switch, which we can go back and we can fill that gap in later if you so desire. But I'm just going to press this in with my fingers here, and then I'm going to go back with the pliers if I need to, and I'm going to press it up against the rails because I do want to get gravel down in here. I just do not want to get it on the actual mechanism that's going to make the thing move. So I'm going to press that down tight, fold this down, make sure I cover up that little nub, and there's the movement mechanism. Now I'm going to put a little bit more tape over the rails that are going to be turning out and whatnot. Actually going to do it this way. That way we don't have any gravel that's possibly sliding down into the gap that's there, and when the switch starts moving, that gravel can fall down into the mechanism and prevent it from moving the way it should. So again, I'm trying to make it so that I'm not covering so much that it's going to inhibit where the ballast goes. And also, I'm not pressing this between, down into the rails there. I'm just keeping it on top. And then if you want to, you can keep adding more tape going down if you're like me and you're paranoid about getting rocks inside the thing, because the switches belong to your father. So I'm just going to keep going down. I'm going to call it good there. just need to use that piece of tape. And then, once we have that done, we can tape the frogs, which is going to be a similar process. Just going to be taking off some of the edges here just to make it a little bit smoother. And again, with the frogs, I'm not super concerned about pushing the tape down like into the actual frog itself. Just covering the top of it will work fine, because the idea is to not have the gravel fall down into it, not necessarily prevent everything from touching the bottom. Then I'm going to try and cover this middle bit here. Again, we don't want any gravel getting in here. And this isn't a perfect art. Basically, the idea is to just, cover the things that you don't want gravel, not necessarily to make it look pretty, because it's just going to come off. And we're going to take this off before the glue dries, because if the glue dries on top of this stuff, you may not be able to get the masking tape off. And then the last frog here. Ideally, your tape is a little bit more cooperative than mine. Or you're just, doing it correctly, unlike me. Alright, so now we have the movement mechanism, which I'm just going to put a little bit of tape over here because I can make a mess sometimes. And I don't want any gravel getting down in there. So now we have everything masked that we don't want any gravel in. So next thing we get to do is we get to ballast the track. So when you're ballasting the switches, it's a little bit more of a fine art, and you have to be a little bit more careful than when you're doing the straights and curves, because again, as good as you may do your masking, it's not going to be perfect, and your goal is to still try to avoid getting any gravel in here. And also, the spaces are a little bit tighter, so you don't want to put on so much gravel that you don't have anywhere to push it. So you need to make sure that you're putting on little bits at a time and spreading them out as you go. That way you know if you have enough. And if you don't have enough, you can always add more. If you have too much, it's an absolute pain in the neck to get out. So let's get started with that. Alright, so got my handy dandy brush and my ballast, which I have the spoon thing open as I pour gravel everywhere. So again, this is a little bit more of a fine art, so it's gonna take a little bit longer, but you want to make sure you're doing it right and you're not putting too much gravel in the ties. Because again, too little is fine, you can always add more. Too much is a problem because taking it out can be an issue. This is also good if you have more than, a single incandescent bulb above your platform. That may also help, because then you can actually see things. So and I'm having the brush be sideways because it can fit into the gaps a little bit easier. And if you have any large rocks that are on top, you can do a little bit of a stippling motion to get the rocks down. Again, I'm trying to be very careful not to add too much. I would like to point out that as of this video being recorded, I ballasted the first turnout yesterday. So I'm relatively new at this, but again, I think it looks rather good, so I'm going to keep doing it. Now the edges are not as much of a big deal because you have a little bit more room to work, and you're not super concerned on this end, at least, about the movement mechanism. As you get closer to this side, there is a tie in here that has part of the mechanism that you're going to want to try to avoid getting rocks on. You could also just mask it. I forgot, so oops. But you know. We're going to do our best here. Okay. The edges are a lot easier than the middle bit, which is in sharp contrast to the straights at curve tracks. Because with the straights and the curves, it's pretty easy to do the middle because you just pour the ballast down the middle and then you spread it out. But with this stuff, it's definitely a little bit more picky. And again, I'm doing my best not to add too much ballast. Doing the edges of the switches it's a very similar technique to doing the edges of the rails. If you have too much in one area, you just kind of spread it down the track, and then you use the side of the brush a lot to stipple it and smooth it out. Alright, so now we're going to go back to the middle here. And again, being very careful not to add too much, I'm going to spread this around. And again, if you feel like maybe it's a little too much, I find that usually like stippling it, like poking it with the brush, tends to push it down a little bit. Now I left these ties a little bit lower just in case I did what I just did right there, which was I put a little bit too much ballast in here so I could spread it out into these ties because I left them a little bit lower. It's a really large stone, so I'm going to pick those out. I'm going to replace it with some finer stuff. And right there I added a little bit too much, so now I have to go in and pick out some stuff with some pliers. Wasn't too bad though. Yeah, and it's not a perfect science. You just kind of, you go in little increments, you take your time. It does take patience, which fortunately is something I kind of have. You do have to be a little bit more careful when you're doing areas like this, where the flanges roll, because with the center rail, you're not super concerned because the center rail just has a wheel that's rolling on top of it. It doesn't have any flanges or anything, but the outer wheels have flanges, and if the gravel is too high, the flanges will run up on top of the gravel, and then it can either cause your train to derail, or it'll just get up in the wheels, and worst comes to worst, it could get up into the gears of the locomotive and cause things to start grinding that aren't supposed to be grinding, and things break, which is not a good thing. So it's best to try to avoid that. This part I'm not super concerned about adding too much because I have a curved track that's coming off of it that isn't ballasted yet. So I can just kind of spread this out onto the curved track. It is possible to do your switches first. That way you don't have to worry so much about when you're putting the ballast in here, about having too much. I didn't do that because the straights and the curves are easier. So I did them first. And there you go. You now have your switch full of ballast. So the last thing I'm going to do before I glue all this down is I'm going to ballast this curve here. And I'm going to try and blend it with the switch. I'm not going to go all the way to the end of this curve track because I do have a 054, 072 curve turnout that goes at the end of this, which ballasting that is going to be a very similar process to this, but it's going to be a lot more difficult, so I'm not going to be making a video on it because I'm going to want to actually focus on doing it for my own layout, which I know sounds slightly selfish, but also it's a really expensive switch, and I don't want to screw it up. So, as much fun as I have doing these, I want to make sure that I know what I'm doing before I actually make a video on it. That way, hopefully when people are watching these because they want to do something similar, they actually have like good information on how to do it. So I'm going to push this ballast all the way up into the corner here, and then I'm going to feather it out. And I didn't try to do this, this just kind of happened, if you're wondering. So it's not like a secret that I'm not telling you. And I think I could probably add a little bit more in here. All right. Nope, never mind. I'm just getting picky here. All right, and there we go. Now, at this point, you may be tempted to want to take off the masking tape just to see what it looks like before you glue everything down. However, I recommend that you glue it down with the masking tape on it, and then after you put all the glue down, then you take it off, because you don't want to get glue in any of the frogs or anything like that, because again, the flanges roll through there, and getting a paper towel in underneath and then cleaning it out later is a pain in the neck. So I got my wet water here, and again, I'm going to give this a rather thorough spray. And then I've got my glue that will hopefully work. There we go. And I'm now going to glue down all the track. There we go. Now it's doing what I want it to. I kind of prepped for this video, but only kind of, so nothing's going perfectly, but you know, it's going well enough. Currently I have the nozzle a little too loose, but it's making it flow better, which is what I'm going for right now. And just like I said in part 1 of this series, with the straights and the curves, you do want to try and cover like every square inch of the ballast with the glue. And then once you have, sorry, I have to glue a part that's off camera because this was well planned. And then once you have everything glued down, you can do one of two things. You can wipe down the rails first, which is what I'm going to do, but I'm going to have to end up doing this again because the glue will bleed through the masking tape. So, there we go. And then, I'm going to take my needle nose pliers here, and pull off all the soaked masking tape. As you can see, oh, maybe you can see, not sure if the camera's picking up, but there is glue that bled through the masking tape. And you can do this with your fingers. I'm just doing it with the pliers because I find it to be a little bit easier, but using your fingers will work. I always find the center one to be the most fun to rip out because it all kind of comes out as one piece. And then once you've pulled out the masking tape, you can take your paper towel again and wipe everything down. Now it's probably a good idea to move your switch around a little bit just to make sure that it still works which as you can see mine is. So there's a couple bit of rocks, and the way that I usually fix that is I pull up on the switch and I blow underneath of it to dislodge anything that might be underneath, which I'm going to do off camera because that's a pain in the neck, but that's my basic process for it, and it usually gets itself sorted out. But seemingly me just playing with it there actually fixed it. So again, it's not a perfect science. I'm going to leave the switch in the middle here. That way, while the glue is drying, if there's any glue that managed to get on the inside of the rails there, it's not going to like glue these parts of the track to the edge. And now I'm going to go over and I'm going to do the turnout, and I'm not going to go into as much detail, but I'll hit the highlights. Alright, so here's my crossover, so let's get started. So once you've let all the glue dry and everything, then you do that vacuuming technique that I showed off in part 1, and then you're done. And you have some very nicely ballasted switches. Now, curve turnouts are going to be a little bit more complicated, and I do have one that I'm going to be ballasting. Just make sure you guys take your time and don't break the switch. That's the reason I'm not going to be doing a video on the curve turnout, is because I'm going to be taking my time because it's a very expensive switch. But anyway, so I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned something. And if you guys end up using this technique on your layout, again, let me know in the comments and let me know how it goes. And I hope you all enjoyed. And anyway, I am CW Holo 1, and have a good day, or maybe good night in your case. See ya.